Since life first emerged on Earth roughly 3.7 billion years ago, scientists estimate that somewhere between 770 million and 5 billion species have roamed, flown, swam, slithered, or simply existed across this planet. Think about that for a moment, an almost unimaginable number of creatures, each equipped with their own unique tools and features to survive. Some had razor-sharp claws, others wings that could take them across oceans, or scales that acted like armor. Together, they formed what could only be described as nature's ultimate survival experiment, trying to beat the odds in a game we call life. And yet, for all their adaptations, all their triumphs, and all the eons they had to evolve, researchers believe less than 0.1% of these species are still around today. That means over 99.9% of every creature that has ever lived on this planet has vanished, swept away by time. But here's where things get even stranger. It's not just random extinction wiping them out. There seems to be a kind of invisible clock ticking down for nearly every species, and the vast majority don't make it past a certain point. That point? 15 million years. Now, let's be clear. This isn't some magical number where a species hits year 14.9 million and then suddenly vanishes. It's more like a statistical barrier. By the time 15 million years roll around, almost no species are left to celebrate the milestone. A sweeping study of various taxonomic groups, essentially a giant roll call of every fossilized animal we've ever found, revealed a sobering truth. Not one group managed to average a species lifespan of 15 million years or more. In fact, most didn't even get close. Mammals, for example, have a particularly grim prognosis. Their average lifespan as a species is just 1 million years. That's it. And if this trend holds true for us Homo sapiens, the so-called pinnacle of evolution, then we only have about 700,000 years left to enjoy life as we know it. That number might sound shocking, but it gets even bleaker when we look back further in time. Take dinosaurs and pterosaurs, for example. Despite ruling the Earth for over 160 million years as a group, their individual species rarely lasted longer than 500,000 years. It's as if the rules of survival were even harsher back then, making the game of life a brutal, short-lived affair. And if you think modern species have it any easier, think again. The title of oldest existing single species currently goes to Triops cancriformis, a type of tiny freshwater crustacean that might be just under 30 million years old. Sure, that's impressive compared to most species today, but considering the millions of species still alive, it's not exactly comforting. Now you might be wondering, what about those so-called living fossils we always hear about, like the horseshoe crab or coelacanth? Aren't they examples of species that have defied the odds? Well, not quite. These animals represent genera or families that have persisted over time, but the individual species within them have come and gone, following the same pattern of extinction. So, circling back to the question at hand, why do so few species survive past 15 million years? It's not like species have a built-in biological timer ticking down to their expiration date. Unlike individuals, species don't age in a way that seals their fate. Which leaves us asking the real question, why do almost none make it past this invisible line? Especially when mass extinction events only seem to happen once every 100 million years or so. The simple answer? Life is just that hard. Surviving on this planet is like being in an impossible game designed to knock you out at every stage. No matter what kind of organism you are, where you live, or how well adapted you think you've become, nature always seems to find a way to pull the rug out from under you. The longer answer? There are so many ways a species can meet its end that the odds of lasting even 10 million years, let alone 15, are practically non-existent. While the number of possible extinction scenarios is endless, researchers have pinpointed a few recurring culprits. These account for the vast majority, up to 99%, of all species extinctions. Let's call them the big levels in the game of survival, and fair warning, they're as brutal as they are unfair. The first level, and arguably one of the most relentless, is something known as co-extinction. Here's the deal. Every animal on this planet relies on at least one other species for something, whether it's food, protection, or even a place to live. Think about an anteater and the ants it devours, or a Dryosaurus herd sticking close to a Stegosaurus for safety. Most of the time, these relationships are helpful but not entirely essential. However, for some species, their survival depends entirely on another, creating a fragile bond that's just waiting to snap. Parasites, for instance, need their host to survive or reproduce. And in some cases, even predators can find themselves in trouble if their prey disappears. Take the Haast's eagle, for example. This massive bird of prey once thrived in New Zealand. But when its main food source, the moa, was hunted to extinction, the eagle soon followed, unable to adapt. It's a strange and tragic scenario where a species evolves itself into a corner by becoming too specialized for its own good. Co-extinction doesn't have a set timeline. Some species disappear almost immediately after their partner is gone, while others linger for years or even millennia before they too vanish. Historically, co-extinction wasn't a major problem, but in the age of humans, it has become one of the leading causes of species decline. Why? Because we have a habit of targeting specific animals, often those that play crucial roles in ecosystems. Studies suggest that up to 50% of animals currently facing extinction are at least partially victims of co-extinction. And that's just the beginning of the domino effect. If a species reliant on another disappears, what happens to the species that depended on them? Entire ecosystems can destabilize, creating a cascading chain reaction where survival becomes increasingly improbable. It's like building a house of cards. When one falls, the rest are bound to follow. Now, while co-extinction is devastating, not every species falls victim to it. Unfortunately, there's another level of extinction risk that no species can escape from, no matter how successful or stable they might seem. And this one doesn't come from the outside world, it comes from within. Enter genes, the microscopic building blocks that make every species what they are. While genes are essential for life, they're far from perfect. In fact, they can sometimes become a species' worst enemy. Imagine playing a video game where every step you take has a small chance of triggering a random explosion. That's kind of what it's like when genes turn against a species. The ways genes can lead to extinction are complex and varied, but one major factor is population size. A small population means a limited gene pool, which creates two big problems. First, it increases the risk of genetic diseases spreading throughout the population. Second, it drastically reduces a species' ability to adapt to new challenges. In an ever-changing world, adaptability is key, and without it, a species' days are numbered. But the genetic hurdles don't stop there. On top of everything else, species also face a challenge known as gene erosion. This occurs when a population permanently loses specific genes that may have been vital for their survival. Imagine losing tools from a toolbox that you didn't know you'd need until it was too late. It's not just a setback, it can be a death sentence. When you start to factor in all these challenges, the outlook for long-term survival begins to feel incredibly bleak, almost as though nature itself is rigged against you. Even if a species manages to survive a massive catastrophe, like an extinction event, the aftermath often leaves them genetically crippled. The sudden and drastic drop in genetic diversity can all but seal their fate, making survival in the long run nearly impossible. The same grim scenario plays out when a small group of animals attempts to establish a new population. Even if they manage to settle and reproduce, the lack of a sufficiently diverse gene pool can prevent them from thriving over generations. It's a bit like starting a business with only one product. There's no room for adaptation or growth. Ironically, the reverse situation can be just as dangerous. When a species thrives so well in an environment that it has no reason to migrate or expand its range, it creates an entirely new set of problems. By settling into a small, stable population within a limited area, they inadvertently increase their vulnerability. If something catastrophic happens, like a fatal mutation spreading through the population, it can spiral out of control. And while mutations are a natural part of evolution, not all of them are helpful. In fact, some can be downright catastrophic. Over a span of 15 million years, it's almost inevitable that harmful mutations will crop up. If the population isn't large enough to breed out these bad genes, the consequences can be devastating. This is where small populations often hit a brick wall, especially when inbreeding becomes unavoidable. Inbreeding creates a vicious cycle. As animals are forced to mate with close relatives, harmful genetic traits become amplified, creating a feedback loop that only worsens with time. This isn't just a theoretical problem, it's happened to some of the most iconic animals in history. Take, for example, one of the stars of the Ice Age, the woolly mammoth. About 10,000 years ago, woolly mammoths were already in serious trouble. Their populations were dwindling, but they were still holding on. During this decline, a small group of mammoths managed to escape to Wrangel Island, a remote patch of land in the Arctic Ocean. For a time, it must have felt like a sanctuary, a final refuge that offered the remnants of the mammoth's ideal habitat. At its peak, the population on Wrangel Island may have reached about 1,000 individuals. From the mammoth's perspective, the island probably seemed like a safe haven, but in reality, it was more of a trap. While Wrangel Island is sizable, roughly the size of Puerto Rico, it wasn't big enough to support a genetically diverse population of mammoths. Over generations, their genetic diversity plummeted, setting the stage for what scientists call a genetic meltdown. And trust me, a genetic meltdown is just as disastrous as it sounds. Within 6,000 years, about 200 mammoth generations, these majestic creatures became riddled with harmful mutations. They developed thin, translucent hair that failed to protect them from the cold. Diabetes, cancer, infertility, and even the loss of their sense of smell, which may have left them unable to find food. Researchers have described the final population of Wrangel Island as genetically broken. By around 2000 BCE, the last mammoths had died, bringing the species to an end. This long, drawn-out extinction wasn't just tragic, it was a stark reminder of how precarious survival can be. And yet, even with all these genetic pitfalls, species don't always get the luxury of fading out slowly. In many cases, nature has other, far more aggressive ways to deliver the final blow. The three biggest culprits? Competition, predation, and disease. These are the ruthless forces that have shaped ecosystems for millions of years, and they continue to wreak havoc today. Humans are a prime example of both competition and predation. Our ability to outcompete other species for resources and actively hunt them has driven countless animals to extinction. But humans aren't the only troublemakers. Take the fungus Batrachocaetrium, for instance. This microscopic killer has been responsible for wiping out up to 90 species of amphibians worldwide through disease alone. Whether it's a predator, a competitor, or a pathogen, these forces are relentless. And here's the kicker. They often share a common weapon-invasive species. These uninvited guests wreak havoc wherever they go, disrupting ecosystems, outcompeting native species, and sometimes even introducing new diseases. This phenomenon of invasive species creating havoc isn't new, it's something we've seen throughout history, and we humans have only made it worse in recent times. One striking example from the past is the Great American Interchange during the Pleistocene. This was a time when dozens of animal species migrated between North and South America after the formation of the Isthmus of Panama. Some of these newcomers adapted so well to their new homes that they became successful invasive species, and not everyone was thrilled about it. The arrival of these invaders ultimately led to the extinction of multiple native megafauna. South America, in particular, saw its ecosystems take a massive hit. Iconic animals like the native ungulates survived, but not without paying a steep price. They emerged from this period significantly diminished in both diversity and dominance. And here's where things get even trickier. Remember what we talked about earlier: when genetic diversity drops, there are no second chances. The odds are already stacked against species trying to recover. Combine that with the introduction of invasive species, and the challenges become nearly insurmountable. But it's not just about the invaders sometimes. Even the species you're sharing a habitat with can become your worst enemy. Small changes in the environment can suddenly shift the balance of power. Imagine this. A catastrophic flood in a Siberian valley wipes out 70% of the tiger population. With fewer tigers around, bears step in to claim the territory, leaving the surviving tigers without their preferred hunting grounds. Or consider how a particularly good breeding season for wolves could spell disaster for deer populations. These delicate tipping points are everywhere in nature. Even in the distant past, competition between native species shaped the survival of entire groups. Take the Morrison Formation during the Mesozoic era, for example. This ancient ecosystem was home to a variety of theropod dinosaurs, but they didn't all roam freely. Predators like Ceratosaurus found their ranges restricted, based on where larger carnivores like Allosaurus were already dominating. The struggle for survival is a tale as old as time. And here's another curveball: the emergence of entirely new species. Evolution doesn't take a break, and for every species that appears, the delicate balance of ecosystem shifts. New adaptations and behaviors often mean competition heats up even further. This constant flux in species diversity is one more reason why reaching the 15 million year mark as a single, unchanged species is nearly impossible. Let's say you do manage to beat the odds and survive every challenge thrown your way. Even then, by the time the clock strikes 15 million years, your species will almost certainly have evolved into something new. While this might not technically count as extinction, it still marks the end of a species as it once was a significant roadblock to long-term survival. Of course, speciation, the process of becoming a new species, isn't guaranteed either. It typically happens when a population faces dramatic changes in size, geography, or environment. And here's the thing: environments don't stay the same. Over a span of 15 million years, you can bet that a species will encounter at least a few major shifts in its surroundings. Some environmental changes happen in the blink of an eye, relatively speaking, like the transformation of Chernobyl's landscape after the nuclear disaster. The subsequent rise of the black frogs is a remarkable example of rapid adaptation to extreme conditions. On the other hand, some changes unfold over millennia. But even on a geologic timescale, stability is rare. Most environments, whether forests, lakes, or entire biomes, don't last much longer than a million years. Many disappear or undergo radical transformations within just a few thousand years. And when these changes occur, the results are often devastating. While some species adapt or evolve, many are left with only two choices: relocate to a new habitat they may not be suited for, or perish. This brings us to one of the most unpredictable forces in this survival game: climate change. Environmental shifts can be triggered by countless factors, but climate change has been a consistent culprit throughout Earth's history. In a way, Earth itself, Mother Nature, is the ultimate challenge. Now, don't get me wrong, Earth is far more hospitable than most other planets. But let's not sugarcoat it, she has her moments. Even today, there are regions of the world where nature isn't just indifferent, it's downright hostile. From desertification in Africa to the shrinking glaciers of the Arctic, Mother Nature continues to remind us just how fragile ecosystems can be. And this is where the real question arises: how does any species manage to navigate these relentless challenges and survive in a world that seems designed to test their limits at every turn? With little warning, Earth has a way of throwing curveballs that can change everything. Massive volcanoes can suddenly erupt, spewing ash and lava across vast distances. Devastating wildfires can ignite in an instant, wiping out entire ecosystems. A super drought might settle in, turning lush landscapes into barren wastelands. Or sometimes, the weather simply takes a turn for the worse: too cold. too long and triggers massive die-offs in vulnerable populations. And this list barely scratches the surface. These kinds of events happen all the time. Most aren't severe enough to cause a global extinction, but their local impacts can still be devastating. And here's the kicker. It's these smaller, more frequent disasters that can take the biggest toll over time. One study found that roughly 7,000 such events occur worldwide every single year. That's an astronomical number. Multiply that by 15 million years, and we're talking over 100 billion individual events. Now, of course, no species is everywhere at once, so they won't experience all these disasters directly. But with numbers like that, it hardly matters. No matter how limited your range, there's no escaping the chaos completely. And as if these smaller, localized events weren't enough, there are also broader, natural cycles at play, cycles that can completely reshape the planet over time. These shifts don't always make headlines, but their cumulative impact can be just as devastating. Think about it. Earth's weather systems, ocean currents, and even its physical movements are always changing. Sometimes these changes are subtle and gradual, like a glacier slowly retreating over centuries. Other times, they're rapid and dramatic, like the sudden shift in monsoons that turned the once lush Sahara into a dry, sandy desert thousands of years ago. Even something as fundamental as Earth's orbit can have profound effects. Many scientists believe the last ice age came to an end because of a slight change in our planet's orbital path, a seemingly small adjustment with massive consequences. For countless species, it was a shift they simply couldn't survive. Now, most of these changes and disasters are small-scale, affecting specific regions or species rather than the entire planet. But every so often, something much more extreme occurs. These rare, catastrophic events don't just cause disruption, they rewrite the rules of life on Earth. Scientists generally classify these as extinction events, and they come in two flavors: minor and major. The causes can vary widely, anything from volcanic eruptions to climate shifts to the unfortunate alignment of multiple disasters at once. But here's the twist. Not all extinction events are Earth's doing. Because as challenging as Mother Nature can be, there's another player in this game: space. Space is, to put it mildly, not friendly. It's a vast, chaotic void full of hazards we can barely comprehend. And every so often, it takes a particularly nasty swing at us. Massive asteroids, traveling at speeds 50 times faster than sound, occasionally decide to pay Earth a visit. When they do, the results are, let's just say, not great for life on the surface. Now, before you panic, let's get one thing straight. Earth is actually pretty well protected. Our atmosphere shields us from the worst of space's radiation. And our solar system's layout means we don't get pummeled by asteroids nearly as often as we could. But every now and then, something slips through. Just ask the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, a single asteroid ended the reign of some of Earth's most iconic creatures. And while extinction events caused by space rocks are rare, they're incredibly effective at delivering destruction quickly. In fact, Earth has experienced a mass extinction event roughly every 30 million years. Most of these events aren't on the same level as the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. But the really big ones, what scientists call the Big Five, are a whole different story. These colossal disasters have the power to erase over 70% of all species in one fell swoop. It's a sobering thought, but it helps explain why so few species make it past the 15 million year mark. Between the relentless challenges posed by Earth itself and the occasional chaos from beyond, the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against long-term survival. So, when you look at the 99.9% of species that didn't make it, it's not hard to see why. It's not just one thing that takes them out, it's the unrelenting combination of small disasters, natural cycles, and rare, catastrophic events that together make reaching 15 million years an almost impossible feat. When you think of some of the most iconic animals on Earth, the ones that inspire awe and are celebrated as nature's greatest hunters or survivors, You might assume they've been around for millions upon millions of years. But here's the surprising truth. Many of these legendary creatures aren't even close to hitting the 15 million year milestone. Take tigers, gray wolves, lions, blue whales, and African elephants for example. Despite their dominance and adaptability, these species all fall within the last 2 million years. Even the most legendary giants of prehistory, like Tyrannosaurus rex, Spinosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Argentinosaurus, creatures that ruled their respective ecosystems with unmatched power, failed to make it anywhere near the mark. And then there are species like the polar bear and grizzly bear. As fearsome and resourceful as they are, they've been around for less than 100,000 years less time than even modern humans, who've only been on the scene for about 300,000 years, give or take. Now, while our species is still in its infancy by evolutionary standards, we've managed to do something that gives us a significant edge in the survival game. Scientists agree that the single most effective defense against extinction is achieving widespread distribution. The logic here is pretty straightforward. The more places a species exists, the less likely it is to be completely wiped out by localized disasters. Multiple studies show that having a broad range acts as a buffer against nearly every form of extinction except for mass extinctions. Of course, thankfully, those catastrophic planet-wide events are rare, occurring roughly 10 times every billion years. Humans, in particular, have done an exceptional job at spreading out, thanks in large part to our ingenuity. Our ability to develop technology has allowed us to adapt to wildly different environments, from freezing Arctic tundras to scorching deserts, and build large, sustainable populations. These advantages make our odds of long-term survival better than most. But here's where things get tricky. Along the way, we've created new challenges entirely of our own making that could threaten not only our survival, but the survival of countless other species as well. In fact, you could argue that we've made the challenge of reaching 15 million years harder than it's ever been. Take nuclear weapons, for example. The sheer destructive power of these devices means that civilization as we know it could be wiped out in a single day, even without nuclear weapons. A large-scale conventional war could yield devastating consequences for humans and the environment alike. And then there are the slower, more insidious threats. Pollution, climate change, habitat destruction, and exposure to harmful chemicals are all byproducts of our modern world. These issues don't just affect the environment, they also impact us directly. For instance, some chemicals are known to damage the very stability of our genomes, potentially altering the course of human evolution itself. Even something as seemingly harmless as domestication is causing ripple effects in nature. Through a process known as genetic pollution, domesticated animals sometimes breed with their wild counterparts. Over time, this dilutes the genetic pool of the wild species, eventually erasing what once made them unique. The cracks in the system are already showing, and the consequences aren't limited to animals. They're affecting us too. Just this year, for the first time in 3 decades, global life expectancy took a downturn, a sobering reminder of how our own actions are catching up with us. A significant portion of this decline has been attributed to problems we created, from the mishandling of pandemics to environmental degradation. So, are we on track to make it to 15 million years? Statistically, the odds are stacked against us. Between the chaos of our own making and the unpredictable forces of nature and the universe, survival at that scale is a monumental challenge. But before we lose hope, let's take a moment to honor those remarkable species that have defied the odds. They've endured the countless disasters and shifts that have reshaped this planet time and time again. And in doing so, they serve as a powerful reminder of the resilience and adaptability that life is capable of when given the chance.